One, we're live.
Thank you and welcome everyone to this Cabinet meeting. In addition to my Cabinet members and our directors and officers here at the London Borough of Merton, I'm really pleased to welcome Councillors McLean and Southgate and Councillor Irons, who's with us on item 4, but very welcome to stay throughout. We're on item 1, which is apologies. If I hear none, then there are none, and thank you for all being here. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest? I hear none. We move on to item 3, and this is regarding the minutes of our meeting held on the 12th of October 2020. As with Zoom meetings, what I ask for here is for if there are any dissenters. Are there any dissenters to the minutes of our meeting held on the 12th of October being approved? I hear none. Thank you very much. Those minutes are approved. We move on to item 4. That's reference to Cabinet from the Sustainable Communities Panel on the grounds maintenance performance. Councillor Natasha Irons.
Thank you very much, Leader. Just to bring you the recommendations that we had from panel that on the 1st of September, we heard from a range of residents, including the Merton's Independent Green Spaces Forum and some residents, and we had some feedback about concern around basic horticultural knowledge for people on the ground and doing the work and cutting around things like trees. But there was also actually some really positive comments about ID Verdi's work and their the way that they work with the local community and kind of engage with local groups, and are really happy to have that kind of input. So that was really, really positive. The panel really wanted to get across how grateful we were for ID Verdi's work during the lockdown, the first one, and again, just that they're keeping our parks running, which are vital to us at this point in this period of time. So their hard work doesn't go unnoticed, and we're all very grateful for that. So on to the recommendations themselves. We were very interested in how the scoring is put together. So the service seems to be performing pretty well, but it seems to be an average over all green spaces that we have. And as you know, we have varying green spaces, everything from grass verges to beautiful parks. So we wanted to get a little bit more information about how that average was created. So we made some recommendations around looking at the ratios to spaces that pass inspection and those that don't, and what the kind of re-inspection rate is. We wanted to kind of get an idea about what the standards were for each type of green space, and we wanted to also kind of have some site visits along with the client officers when they're doing the inspection, so we can understand how they put those scores together. One of the key things that came out of it was the need for a tree strategy within the council to help plug into the council's climate agenda, but also an overarching green spaces strategy, so that could help plug into the council's climate commitment, but also kind of focus on community well-being, just to make sure that our green spaces are still providing that massive open space and care for people in this time. So we also wanted to come back to this point about a one-stop shop reporting system where residents can raise issues for parks and street scene in one place, so that it's very easy to get their kind of feedback across. So we would like updates about that and the timeline, because we know that work is happening. So we just wanted to understand how far things had got along with that. We also think it would be really helpful to have signage in parks encouraging residents to feedback and to kind of express their views, and making it very clear how they can do that, because some of the feedback we got was that it wasn't always clear how to report issues and how to kind of raise things when they happened. We recommended a quarterly stakeholder meeting between the Independent Green Space Forum and other like-minded organisations, so friends groups and things like that, just so that the council was plugged into the conversations happening in the community and making sure that everybody's on the same page. We recommend that the ID Verdi's annual report, along with the independent Green Spaces Forum report, comes to Sustainable Communities, because we found it really interesting to have both of those reports side by side. So that would be a really helpful thing to have in the future. And that we would very much like ID Verdi to return to the panel within a year to kind of see how this work has progressed. And we also wanted a little bit more transparency around quarterly and monthly reporting. So, any questions?
Thank you very much, Councillor Irons, and thank you for all your work. We'll turn to Councillor Caroline Cooper-Marbert before I go to the Director and then to any Cabinet questions or comments. Councillor Caroline Cooper-Marbert.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I say thanks to Councillor Irons and the members of the Sustainable Communities and Overview Scrutiny Panel for their work and for all of the recommendations they've put forward. I've met with officers and they are considering all of the recommendations. And I think it's about working through the timeline of delivery. And they've already assured me that they will be in contact with the panel in providing information around that. But and so thank you for that. But if you don't mind, if I can just spend a few minutes in making a few remarks, which Councillor Iron have already touched upon, because during the lockdown, we all, could see how hard our officers and officers of ID Verdi and Kingdom worked in our parks. So all of our parks were kept open and clean and as safe as possible for residents to use during a very difficult time. And in fact, when you look back in last year, we had residents survey and we had 81% of residents, of park users rating our parks as very good or good. And we had 86% of young people rating the parks as good and very good. So it's straight across the board, not just adults or parents bringing their young ones, but young people who were able to express their views on our parks. So I think that's quite commendable. So I just wanted to say thank you to them for their hard work. And I'm sure this second lockdown, they will be continuing to work hard as well. There are lots of improvement going on in our parks. We've had new table tennis tables in some. And when you talk about ID Verdi, they work very well with Friends Group as well, supporting them and in what their plans are or what they want to achieve in the parks. Of course, not everything is possible, but helping them to come, work together to see what is possible and how we can deliver that. So just want to say thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline, and for your work with our residents and for our parks. Before I go to Cabinet members' questions and comments, I'd like to turn to our lead director on this, Chris Lee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Irons for the recommendations, and thanks to the panel. I'll be brief, just to say that we find the recommendations very helpful. We're already working on them, and we'll be bringing a report back on the recommendations to Cabinet as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for that positive statement, and obviously the positive statement from Caroline as well regarding the recommendations. Any questions, comments from Cabinet members on this item? Well, there being none, thank you very much, Councillor Irons. Thank you for your report. You'll be pleased to know that those recommendations will be referenced and taken forward. Please thank all your panel members for their work on this item. Thank you. So we're on item 4. It's the reference to Cabinet from the Sustainable Communities Panel on the grounds maintenance performance. It's recommendation 1, reference the referencing, and are there any dissenters to that recommendation on item 4 being agreed? There being no dissenters, that means that item 4 is approved by this Cabinet. Thank you all very much, and thank you to Councillor Irons in particular. We now turn to item 5. That's the allocation of the neighbourhood seal funding, and I'll now turn to Councillor Martin Welton. Martin, you're muted.
Sorry, I forgot. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to formally move the recommendations as set out in this report. This report seeks Cabinet approval for the allocation of neighbourhood seal funding of over £400,000 towards urgent projects in the borough. 2 of these projects are to support impacts of COVID-19 upon community facilities, namely £49,650 to Carer Support Merton for promoting digital equality for carers, and £45,000 to Citizens Advice Merton and Lambeth to cover an additional debt advisor dedicated to help capacity issues. The funding for carer support would enable them to employ a volunteer coordinator 27 hours a week to recruit and train a pool of volunteers to support carers, one-to-one for 8 weekly sessions to develop the digital skills for life, with the aim to progress their learning further and potentially to develop skills for work. Digital equipment will be loaned to carers where required. This will be targeted to informal carers to help them adjust to demands of COVID, since the onset of which much of the support services have moved online. The funding is required urgently so that carers can acquire the skills needed to access the online support. The proposal will also help build a more resilient environment for supporting carers who may have difficulty accessing technology. We all know the valuable role the Citizens Advice Bureau plays in giving advice, and demand has considerably grown during the COVID-19 crisis. Increasingly, large numbers of people are seeking advice on debt problems. This will allow additional capacity to be provided in this area, which is their greatest demand in terms of their services. The next project is to allocate £300,000 to Morden Town Centre improvements. The improvements, which we are seeking approval for, will be spent over the next 18 months, which will allow us to help revitalise the town centre whilst the procurement of a development partner progresses. The scheme would build upon the ideas within the existing project Merton the Place, which has currently been scoped, supporting high street recovery and placemaking with measures to support meanwhile use. The funding would go towards shopfront improvements at the premises not part of the Morden Regen scheme, measures to support local businesses including lamppost banners, public art around Morden Station, improvement to vacant properties, and tidying the highways, which will enhance the look and feel of the town centre. Finally, Cabinet approval is also sought to allocate up to £20,000 of neighbourhood seal funding to the purchase of IT equipment, including devices and other items to support pupils across the borough in accessing internet-based learning from home for those that have to isolate. As of the 22nd of October, individual schools have been responsible for teaching children online who have been sent home. Many schools across the borough will have significant numbers of children without internet access or devices or both. In the event that a class or bubble is sent home because a classmate has been identified with or suspected of having coronavirus, these children will need help. The proposal is increasing the resilience of the borough as a place for youth families to move to and bring up children, bridging the gap and improving social capital through great connectivity within the school communities. We know the huge challenges schools are under, but it is important that children are given the support and get the teaching that they need. In total, these allocations would enable a portion of the £830,000 of neighbourhood seal funding to be spent on projects without waiting for the next round of approvals in the autumn of 2021. I would also like to thank Tim Catley as a Section 106 officer and Tara Butley for all their work on this report, but also as well advice from officers in CSF on the £20,000 to help our schools to provide that internet equipment, including dongles and SIM cards. To conclude, the use of neighbourhood seal will help provide valuable additional support to our community as a result of the COVID pandemic, especially in addressing the digital divide, providing additional support to citizen advice for debt advice, and funding in Morden to help improve the public realm. It also aligns with our council priorities in bridging the gap and aligns with the priorities in terms of how funding is used for SEAL. I ask Cabinet to approve these recommendations tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welton, for those excellent recommendations. I now turn to our lead officer, director on this item, that's Chris Lee.
And nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for your work and your team's work. I now turn to Cabinet members. I see Councillor Mark Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just want to follow up what some of the things that Councillor Welton has been talking about earlier, and really extend thanks beyond him on the issue of devices for our local school children. I'd like to draw attention to the hard work that's been done by the local MP for Mitcham and Morden, Siobhan McDonough. I think she's been absolutely exemplary in highlighting the concerns that many of us have, that during the pandemic, some of the children in our less well-off areas have really slipped behind because they haven't had the same access to electronic learning that some of their classmates have. And I think it's very good use of this money to try and establish even just a small amount that can go towards helping children in those areas to get the help that they need. So I pay tribute to Siobhan for her campaigning on that. Also, echo what Martin said about the hard work of officers in turning that particular proposal around in a short amount of time, and schools as well for their willingness to engage on the issue and their keenness to participate. Obviously, it's something that we've all seen. I've seen in the voluntary work I've been doing, helping at food banks over the past few months, that there's a great deal of need amongst our residents, and this is this has really highlighted the issue that we've had here. The council's going to use the money to get IT equipment to families whose children can't access the education that they need, and I think it's a great use of the neighbourhood fund. What I would say is we are determined to do what we can to help ensure no child in Merton has to miss out on vital education during the pandemic. One of our priorities as a council has always been to bridge the gap between the least well-off families in Merton and everyone else. And access to basic equipment and internet access for schools when lessons are taking place at home are things that no child should be without. I think ensuring fair access to education for all children is a priority for this council. And during the pandemic, we have found practical, useful ways of doing that. But I also want to stress that we can't do everything without the resources we need. And our work to get devices to children in Merton really underlines why ministers should trust and fund councils so that we can get on with it. We've obviously done great work with free school meals as well, and I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in that as well. But if our costs aren't covered, then there is a risk that the extra things that we're doing like this will be lost. So I'd also use this opportunity to kind of call on the government to remember that they need to keep their promise when they said do whatever it takes and they would fund us. Please keep that promise, because it helps us to help our children and make sure that none of them miss out. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. Any more contributions from Cabinet members on this item? I think both Councillor Welton and Councillor Allison have summed up very well this item. So we're on the allocation of neighbourhood SEAL funding. This is a business-like approach. As Councillor Welton has reminded us, we could have sat back and waited till the autumn of 2021. We're now using money from developers to help carers in Merton. We're using money from developers to help those in debt via our Brilliant Citizens Advice Bureau, law centres, and we're using developers' money to help school pupils in accessing IT equipment with a big thank you to our local Member of Parliament, Siobhan McDonough, MP for Mitcham and Morden. It gives me a great pleasure to ask the Cabinet tonight whether they are in agreement with recommendations 1 to 3 with regard to the allocation of neighbourhood seal funding being our item number 5. Are there any dissenters to agreeing item 1, 49,000 to care and support, item 1 still 45,000 to Citizens Advice Merton and Lambeth, item 2 300,000 towards Morden Town Centre improvements, and item 3 £20,000 for school pupils to purchase IT equipment? Are there any dissenters? I see no dissenters, and I'm pleased to inform everyone that allocation of neighbourhood seal funding has been agreed as our item number 5. And thank you to Cabinet, thank you to the officers, thank you to Councillor Welton, and for that intervention by Councillor Mark Allison. We turn to item 6, that's Melrose School expansion, the appointment of constructor. I am minded, and I know that my Cabinet members have looked at Appendix 1, which is the green paper. Therefore, we're always minded not to exclude the public from our meetings, and we do not have to. So we won't be taking items 10 or 11 because my Cabinet is minded and has looked at Appendix 1, the green paper, which is the exempt paper. I now turn to Councillor Eleanor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to move the recommendation to award this contract as outlined. This item is about expanding our capacity to educate children and young people with social, emotional and mental health needs. We want to educate them in local authority schools close to their home, rather than sending them further away. This is one of our key priorities as a council, to improve our offer for families with children with special educational needs and disabilities, and to do so in a way that offers value for money. Melrose is a good school. It's already providing places for secondary school pupils with these needs. By building an extension on land, we'll be able to provide places for 24 primary school pupils and expand and improve the facilities for the existing secondary school. The legal expansion of the school has already been agreed. Planning permission was also recently approved, so everything is lined up and ready to go. The report details the processes we've gone through to appoint the contractor. As you pointed out, there is a confidential appendix, but I don't think we need to discuss this. It's clear that we have gone through the processes required by the Council Contract Standing Orders and by Public Contracts Regulation to appoint a contractor. So I formally move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Councillor Stringer for that concise report and for bringing this recommendation and this paper to the Cabinet. I now turn to our Assistant Director of Education, Jane McSherry, for any additions.
Nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for all the work that you do for our schools and in this regard for our special schools. Thank you very much. Are there any Cabinet contributions? Thank you all. As I've said, we're minded with regard to Green Paper Appendix 1. So we're on item 6. It's Melrose School expansion, appointment of the contractor. And we're on recommendation A to award the contract for the school expansion construction works for Melrose School as outlined in the confidential appendix. We're all mindful of Appendix 1. Are there any dissenters to recommendation A? There being no dissenters, this Cabinet approves recommendation A and the appointment of constructor for the Melrose School expansion. Thank you all very much. That was item 6. We now turn to item 7, and that's the Council Tax Support Scheme 2021-2022. Councillor Mark Allison.
Yeah, thank you again, Leader. First of all, can I just start by extending my thanks to the officers who've worked on delivering the Council Tax Support Scheme over the last 7 years, I think, and really pay tribute to them. I'd like to thank David Kepler and his team in particular. It's always been an honour to work alongside him, and I know how committed they are to providing a good service and looking after those people in Merton who need particular help, and have made sure that that we're there when they need us. I'm very proud of the scheme. that we've got in Merton. Back in 2013, as you remember, the government cut funding for council tax support schemes by 10%, then it's increased further. And they essentially invited councils to reduce the amount of support that they gave to people on lower incomes. We've resisted that year after year because we recognise that that times have been tough, and they've been toughest of all for people on low incomes. So we want to make sure that that their council tax doesn't increase each year. It's a way of helping families, and it's also a way of bridging the gap. Bridging the gap. We've talked about some of the work that we are doing to get devices to some of our least well-off kids. I'd suggest that the work that we've done recently on free school meals. Maybe Councillor Stringer would like to say something later, just to emphasise how the work that we're doing on council tax support is backed up by the work that she's been doing recently to get food to those who need it the most. So what we're asking tonight is to support the council tax support scheme, which has been going for some time. Each year we have to decide whether to update the scheme, as it's no longer funded by the government in full. And to restate our intention that even though the government is no longer funding the scheme to its full, we want to continue to provide discounts for low-income households and ensure that their bills don't rise. Based on the number of claimants that we had as of October, we estimate that renewing the council tax support scheme would cost around about £10.8 million. Obviously, with the second stage of the second wave of the pandemic, it may affect even more people, but we think it's the right thing to do. And we want to protect those residents in our borough who are struggling to get by. And I'm pleased that we're able to stop them from facing increased council tax bills if we pass this tonight. The effects of the pandemic have hit residents on low incomes particularly hard and driven more people who have lost their jobs or been furloughed into hardship. This scheme will help to bridge the gap between them and other residents, and it shows that we will do all we can to help our residents when they need us. We've worked hard to take a business-like approach to managing our budgets, and our success in looking after the borough's money has meant that even now, when we're facing an unprecedented deficit because of the pandemic, we can still support residents when times are tough. We can support residents when times are tough. We should support residents when times are tough. And I recommend that we support this motion now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allison, for your commitment and dedication to this since the nasty introduction back in 2012, 2013 of a cut to people's council tax support. I now turn to Caroline Holland, our Director of Corporate Services, to see whether she'd like to add anything.
Chair, just very briefly, in paragraph 6.4, it does set out for the first time since the scheme was introduced that the cost has actually increased this year. We had seen a reduction each year, and I think that just highlights the impact that COVID has had on our residents in the borough. The extension of the furlough scheme to the end of March will help because we had been anticipating a further increase in the number of people relying on our council tax support scheme. So that should help mitigate the impact in this year and maybe a further impact next year on the scheme. But happy to take any questions, and David Kepler is with me to take the more detailed technical questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And David, did you want to say anything before there may be any questions to you?
No, thank you, Chair. I'll take some questions if there are any, though.
And thank you for your support and for your hard work. Are there any interventions, questions, comments by Cabinet members? Councillor Eleanor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for your continued commitment to support our households with low incomes. We know that growing up in poverty puts children at greater risk of a range of poorer life outcomes. Children who've been in low income experience on average worse outcomes in education, in health, and their wider life. So it is great that we are doing what we can to support those people in the most vulnerable circumstances, to do our bit to close that gap. And if you'd allow me, I would like to talk about the recent work we've been doing on this as well. So I'd like to thank the leader and officers for their work and support more recently on addressing food poverty. When the government refused to back the Labour motion to support throughout the holidays, families entitled to free school meals during this really challenging time, we at Merton made the decision to provide that support ourselves, despite, as Mark and Caroline have made clear, the numbers of families affected growing day by day. I'd like to thank the schools for their hard work in supporting families at risk of food poverty and working with us on this, on top of their many other roles at the moment. And I'd also like to thank the many charities, businesses and individuals who stepped up to support vulnerable families. And if you'd forgive me for singling one out, we were lucky to receive a really generous donation from O'Halloran and O'Brien, a Morden-based construction firm, towards the cost of providing food vouchers for families. So thank you to them and to everyone else who's been working to address food poverty in our families. And the scheme is a good indication of our support for those households. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I add my thanks to that SME, that small firm, local, O'Halloran and O'Brien, for their kind gesture. It really is very, very much appreciated by all of us here. Any further Cabinet contributions on this item? Thank you. This is an item that gives me great pleasure year in, year out. It gets more and more difficult, as we know. It's costing more, but our values dictate that we continue to support households on low income. And I want to thank Councillor Mark Allison, Caroline Holland and David Kepler for all their work and for the Cabinet members for their support. But we're on item 7, Council Tax Support Scheme, as the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Finance has said. We need to update, revise the Council Tax Support Scheme, and we need to recommend that the Council adopts the proposed revisions. And therefore, those are the two recommendations, recommendations 1 and 2 on item 7, our Council Tax Support Scheme for families on low incomes here in the London Borough of Merton at this very, very difficult time. Are there any dissenters to the agreement to those two recommendations? There being none, this Cabinet approves the Council Tax Support Scheme 21-22 updating and revision through the Council. Thank you all very much for that. We are now on item 8 and 9, and I leave it to Councillor Mark Allison how he wants to deal with those two items. This is the financing, the draft business plan, and the financial monitoring. Items 8 and 9, over to Councillor Mark Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And as part of our efficient business-like way of running things, I think it's probably more efficient to just take both items together, if I can speak on them. First of all, I'd like to start by saying I don't think it's a particular secret to the world, but this is my last finance report that I'll be bringing as a Cabinet Member for Finance after 10.5 years of Cabinet Member for Finance. And I'd just like to use this opportunity, if you'll indulge me, to say just a really big thank you to all of the officers and staff of Merton Council from 2010 through until 2020. There's far too many to mention individually, but I would like to say that the professionalism of the people who work for Merton Council is absolutely second to none. And the improvements that we've seen and the ability to deal with our finances over the last 10 years has been a remarkable testament to the terrific team that we've got, obviously led by Caroline, who I'd like to pay particular tribute to. Tonight, you've been a great director to work with, Caroline, and work particularly hard. And at no time have you had to work harder than now. But please pass on my thanks and our thanks to everybody in your team who makes all this happen. The financial report is a monthly report that we provide to help us ensure that the budget is running smoothly and to make adjustments throughout the course of the year and to report what actions we're taking to make sure we're on top of things. And the last few months' financial reports have been particularly taxing because of what's been going on with COVID, and we've seen unprecedented differences in our forecasts based on what we anticipated that we might be spending back in March. And the financial monitoring report this month is showing that the deficit this year alone is £10.7 million, which, to put it into context, we raise £100 million through council tax every year. So it's more than equivalent to more than 10% variance this year because of COVID. And it's also worth stressing that without COVID having happened, we would actually be seeing a £3.5 million surplus this year, a positive variance. So that's a difference of about 14.2, 14.3 million pounds, as you'll see on page 26 in the table there. A 14.3 million pounds like loss effectively because of COVID to the council. And that may indeed rise because of the second wave, and it may have an impact. We expect it will have an impact in future years because it will take some time for the local economy to recover. So I'd like to just draw people's attention to the financial monitoring report, which shows the scale of the problem that we've been dealing with. So that being said, we then move to the business plan, so sorry, I should have just mentioned about the dedicated schools grant, which is also in the financial monitoring report, showing that we're estimating a deficit of 27 million pounds. Dedicated schools grant is what's supposed to happen is that the special needs education, children who need special needs education, we will provide that service for our children, as is absolutely right. But we would anticipate that the government would provide the full funding for that, and that's not currently happening. We are in deficit because the government aren't supporting us. So that's also having an impact alongside of the impact of COVID. Without either of those happening, we would be in a much better position. And I'm afraid to say that this being my last Cabinet report as the Cabinet Member for Finance, I need to report to Cabinet that we, as a council, face impossible choices if we're going to balance the budget next year, if the government doesn't fund local services in the way that they promised that they will. This report, the budget report, shows that the combined impacts of lost income, the additional costs of providing shielding and other services that we've provided throughout the pandemic, and the continuing shortfall through the DSG, leaves the council with a potential budget gap starting in March of £13 million next year. Now, we have calculated that if COVID hadn't happened, that gap would be just £1.7 million. And the government have promised that if we do whatever it takes, they will make sure that we're all right. So we are calculating, and we are publishing today action that we believe would be necessary as if COVID had never happened, on the assumption that the government will help us out. So we are presenting savings here tonight that we would like to take forward to the Overview and Scrutiny Commission for councillors to scrutinise properly. And these are the savings that we believe that we would have needed to make anyway. So these are the non-COVID savings, if you like. These are not the COVID cuts. These are the ones that we would do. And we want to make it perfectly clear right now that if we have to make further cuts to our budgets, that will be entirely because we haven't been funded for COVID. So anything further from now on would be the COVID cuts, and we would be because the government hadn't funded us for the services that we provide as a result of COVID. And just want to say that the message from the government was very clear: do whatever it takes. And we did play our part to the full. We bridged the gap. We were the front line of the fight against COVID-19. And now we need assurance from the government that they will make good their promise to us so that we can set budgets that don't cut services to our local residents. The difference between the government providing these funds or not is massive. And if the government's money doesn't materialise, the impact will absolutely be felt on our local communities, and especially on those on low incomes. Now, we have behaved in a business-like way by setting our budget using figures that exclude the impact of COVID-19 and other shortfalls in government funding. After 10 years of austerity, we still have to find £1.7 million by March, but we believe this is a manageable amount and can be achieved through efficiencies, income generation, and other things. So we have played our part in fighting this pandemic, but without the clear support from the government that our COVID costs will be covered, we face having to find COVID cuts. And those COVID cuts will be impossible to make without damaging cuts to vital services. Crudely, if the government do not give us the money, the government's COVID cuts could put services that are well loved, like community centres or even libraries, under threat of closure, as well as support for homeless residents and those who need care. All of those services would be under threat if the government do not fund us. Their COVID cuts could stop us even from doing the work that we were talking about just a few minutes ago in reducing council tax for those on low incomes. And their COVID cuts could mean that we would have to stop funding local charities. Now, there is still time. This is our message. There is still time to save these services, and we want to save those services and carry on helping residents when they need us. We have looked after resident services well during the toughest period of austerity this country has seen. We've done it by being efficient and well run. We want to carry on doing it even after COVID, and we call on the government to act, because these COVID cuts would be like nothing we've seen before if they don't help us out now. So on that note, I move the report. I move the savings that help us to solve the non-COVID savings that we would need to make. But I do draw everybody's attention to the scale of what's coming forward and the need for the government to finally listen to local authorities like us and to our staff who've stepped in and done an amazing job in protecting our residents during the COVID crisis. And I move the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Addison. Thank you for your 10.5 years as the Cabinet Member for Finance and for your sterling work with Caroline Holland and with officers like David Kepler and Roger Kershaw and everyone who works closely with you. I'd like to add my thanks to the great team of officers, including Jed Curran, on the finances and the way in which they've been handled over the last 10.5 years. I'd now like to turn to Caroline Holland, our Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the kind words, both you and Councillor Allison. Appreciate that, and we'll pass on your comments to the really strong team I have working alongside me. So focusing on the monitoring report first, whilst it had showed a reduction in the overspend that we were reporting, this was before the announcements of the second lockdown. So there have been some improvements in income, both in our parking services and also within our services for summonses and court fees, which we now think there may be a slight reduction of again. So I suppose just to say that this has been a very difficult year forecasting wise, as well as for some of the impacts COVID has had on our residents. So that's why we're sort of saying that these numbers are still very likely to change. And indeed, the table that we set out on page 26 of the report change constantly with additional grants that come through. So there has been a further announcement of a grant at the weekend. So they have some interesting names. So the winter grant scheme being announced at the weekend. So we're trying to work through what the details of that are to see what the impact is. But some of the grants go to offset the expenditure we have already made, and some grants come with additional responsibilities and duties. So this winter grant scheme is likely to come with additional responsibilities. It's not going to offset some of the costs that we already have. You will see also within that report the capital items and adjustments that we're asking you to make do include the £300,000 SIL adjustment Warden Town Centre. So you can see the work and adding to the capital programme to enable some of the investment that we still need to do to help the local economy recover. Moving on to the business plan report. And there was a comment from the LGA that we only have 5% certainty over our finances for next year. That's quite a scary position to be in this late stage of the financial budgeting year. What we have done is therefore separate out the non-COVID costs from what the COVID adjustments and also the DSG adjustments are likely to be. The settlement is going to be on the 25th of November. The spending review announcement will be on the 25th of November, and then we are anticipating each local authority settlement announcements will then be as late as possible in December, because they need to work through the adjustments of the spending review to work out which each local authority will get. So that leaves us very little time to then work through what those further gaps might be. We will bring a report to the December Cabinet for further adjustments to the business plan and any further updates that we may have around either government funding streams, if there's any changes to the Freedom Pass, but we're working through the impact of the funding agreement for TfL for the government to the end of March to see if there are any adjustments then on some of the savings we might have been anticipating from the reduction in usage of the Freedom Pass to enable us to then reduce our budget gap going forward. Clearly, we have brought forward some savings, and these will be going on to the Commission on Wednesday night, and then form part of the detailed scrutiny process in the new financial year. We will be bringing the equality assessments back to December Cabinet for Cabinet to review, and just to make sure that you have some comments on them before they then also go on to scrutiny in the new financial year. You will see that this still does leave us a gap of 15 million that we're looking at, but I know this figure will be wrong, and therefore it's how we manage that and the work we need to do to make sure that we don't make unnecessary drastic savings, but also some of the savings that are coming forward at this stage are the right service ones that we need to make. So we're trying to balance the major uncertainty alongside the right thing to do for our services and for our residents. This still has some assumptions in around levels of council tax, currently in at 2%, no adult social care precept. So if any of those change, then that clearly will have an impact on that gap. So as soon as we have further information, we want to be able to let clearly Cabinet know, and then let scrutiny know about the impact of any further savings or changes that may need to be made. There are some included within the current budget, and we also need to see if any of that can still be afforded, or is that an easier option than changing some of the services that we have in place. Clearly, some of the assumptions around income levels and shortfall on council tax and business rates will also be adjusted and reflected for the latest information we have available, and seeing if there's any further impact of the second lockdown. We think the impact of extending furlough to March will help some of our businesses, but depending on what happens, is there now going to be a cliff edge in April? But certainly that may help us with some of the forecasting that we have to do, particularly for 21-22, which is the year we do have to do the balanced budget for, but we try and have some impact and some savings in future years to mitigate and have a smooth glide path to enable early and smooth implementation of any further savings that need to be made. I think that's enough comments. Oh, sorry, one final thing from me. We do have Appendix 2 in the report, which sets out the additional expenditure we have made, and then also the current additional grants that we have. As I've said, that number is changing constantly, and indeed we have £7 million worth of discretionary grants to give to our local businesses for lockdown, for closure, for Tier 3. So we're working up a scheme, and we'll be bringing that forward to Cabinet in December for you to agree. So there's still an awful lot of funding coming through, and we need to work through what the impact of that will be. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for that very comprehensive report. Any Cabinet contributions, questions to either Councillor Mark Allison or Caroline Holland? Okay, thank you. Again, thank you to Councillor Mark Allison. Thank you to Caroline Holland. We now come to those recommendations. So we're now on item 8. That is the draft business plan. That's recommendations 1 to 4. The important recommendation here is item 4. Please do consider, and we are considering the COVID impact summary, and we're also considering Appendix 2. So I now turn to my Cabinet. Are there any dissenters to agree recommendations 1 to 4 on item 8, the draft business plan? There being no dissenters, we are in agreement with recommendations 1 to 4 of the draft business plan, item 8. I now turn to item 9, and that is Financial Monitoring Report 2020-21, September 2020, and that is recommendations A to C. And I turn to my Cabinet, and are there any dissenters to agreeing to recommendations A to C of item 9, Financial Monitoring Report 2020-2021? There being no dissenters, this Cabinet agrees to item 9, recommendations A to C. Thank you very much. And tough times ahead, but I know that being business-like, bridging the gap, and a great place for families, we will get through this, but very, very difficult times ahead. Our Chief Executive is here, Councillor Jed Curran.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I start off by thanking both yourself and Councillor Allison for the kind words you said about Council staff. Councillor Allison observed that this was his last meeting dealing with the finances as the Finance Cabinet member, but it's also your last meeting, Leader, as in the chair of the Cabinet, and I didn't want that to pass without saying a few words. I know there will be an opportunity for members to say more at the council meeting on the 18th of November, but this is the last opportunity for me to speak on behalf of the staff to thank you for the fantastic leadership that you've shown over the last 10 years. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you. You've made my job much easier than it could have been, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to you for that. I think you've been in a unique position, really, because you've not only had the experience of being a councillor, but you've also had many years working as an officer in a member-led organisation with the Federation of Small Business. And I think that gave you a real insight into the challenges on both sides of the fence. And that's shown itself in the way that you've worked with me, with the directors, and with all the officers in the council. You've always stressed the need to praise officers, and you've always done that in public. But when it's been necessary, you've also raised with me challenges that you've experienced, but you've always done that privately. And praising in public and challenging in private isn't always easy. We all know it's what we should do, but sometimes it's hard to keep our temper, but you have managed that brilliantly for us. So I'd like to thank you for that. I think you've built wonderful relationships with officers across the council, but you've also built relationships within your own group and between the groups. And when anybody comes to visit Merton, one of the first things they comment upon is the maturity of the political debate and the maturity of relationships that exist across the council. And that couldn't have happened without your leadership and your help. So I'd like to put on record, as I said earlier, my thanks to you on behalf of all the staff, and to wish you all the best in the new adventures that lay ahead of you. I'm sure you're not retiring and you're not going to be a kind of pipes and slippers person. I'm sure there's lots of things you've got that you're planning to do, and I wish you all the best with them. So thank you very much for all you've done. And I'll hand back now just to Councillor Allison, just in case there's anything he wanted to say at this stage. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Gosh, thank you, Jed. You've kind of driven home quite what an impressive body of work Stephen has delivered to Merton in his time as leader over 10.5 years. And you know, it's become almost an irritant to a number of people, but it's a source of pride to me that people use the word business-like about the council, and I think that's a real tribute to you. Obviously, your background in business has been a large part of it, and is probably where the phrase kind of came from. But actually, in the way that you've run the council, it has been very business-like. But also, like obviously from what Jed has said, it's been very professional, respectful, caring, and kind. And I think that those are all aspects of your personality that we see behind the scenes much more than other people. But I think it does transmit itself to the way that that the public regards you as well. The people of Merton will see you working hard and shouting, I'm the leader, as you walk down the street, or if you're not shouting, I'm Fulham, or something like that. And that warmth comes across, and your pride in Merton certainly comes across. But you've also been a good leader, and there has been improvement at the council over the last 10.5 years. You know, the staff and the officers, Jed, Caroline, Hannah, Chris, Rachel, and all of their staff have been part of it, but you have been key to it as well. And I think that's worth us remembering. You sort of like create a huge challenge for the poor soul who's going to take over from you. I've chaired a couple of cabinet meetings, and they're actually more stressful than they look. You're like you know, the swan analogy. You're this beautiful, graceful swan. You know, maybe not with the white feathers so much, although perhaps they've come on a little bit. But you're a swan gliding effortlessly across the surface, doing a fantastic job. But whereas we know the hard work that your you know, your feet are doing, flapping around underneath to make sure that everything happens and is delivered in a professional way. You're a great chair. You're a great communicator to the public, but you're very generous in the opportunities that you give your cabinet and your colleagues on the council to prove themselves. And you know, I'd like to echo what Jed has said. You know, you've been very good to officers through the cabinet, but you've been very good to the cabinet as well, and we'd like to thank you and wish you good luck. You're not going anywhere. I hope he's still going to be part of things and playing a very key role. But in all you do now, and you know, your lovely family, enjoy the extra time that hopefully you're going to have now. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jed, and thank you, Mark. I wasn't expecting this, and I'll just say a few words, and then I think we'll close the meeting. There is a full. Add some words myself at the full council. It does take two to tango, as they say, and so I do want to thank Jed, all the directors and the officers, but also all the councillors. And I see that Councillor Peter Southgate is here. He's been on this journey. I want to thank him and his councillors. I know Councillor Nick McLean has just come on board, but we've worked well together, and the opposition here is not tribal, it's not nasty, and I do appreciate that. And we've got our Liberal Democrat friends on board as well. It's also helpful when you have someone who chillies you along, reminds you where to go, what to do, and does the research and the policy making. So I want to pay a tribute to Deirdre Costigan before, but now to Octavia for all her superb support over the last few years, and obviously to my cabinet members. So it does take two to tango. I did learn a lot when I was at the Federation of Small Businesses about a member officer chemistry, and I think it does work. There's a good partnership here, and I'm eternally grateful to Jed and to all the directors and all the staff. As I said, and I've been saying, I will miss you all, but it is the right time to go. It is the right time to let someone else take over. But as Marcus said, who's taking over, as Marcus said, I'll be around. I'll stay on as a councillor in my beloved ward of Ravensbury, and I'm sure we'll go from strength to strength. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And that concludes, I do believe, the Cabinet. Thank you all very much, and see you in another place at the full council. Bye-bye.